Well, there's a lot on their minds. I mean, obviously, you see a lot of leaders coming here looking for common ground to send a message of unity around issues that really matter on trade, on Israel, Iran, on Ukraine, things like that. The big issue, of course, is whether President Donald Trump is going to be willing to go along. So far, we know he's refusing to sign a joint statement on the Israel-Iran conflict that would have called for de-escalation. The host, Mark Carney, has basically decided to dispense with the traditional joint communique that comes out of a meeting like this. So what you're seeing instead is a lot of leaders coming here looking to do bilateral deals with the U.S. on trade. So the Japanese Prime Minister will be here. You obviously have Canada. You have the UK looking to do its own trade deal. Claudia Sheinbaum, President of Mexico, not a member of the G7, but coming up as well. So they're all seeing this as a chance to sort of get Trump on neutral turf outside the spotlight of the Oval Office and try to cut a deal with him, given that it looks like the traditional role of the G7 as a place where Western leaders or democracies come together and sort of say, here's where we stand together and set these statements of principle. You know, they're just not going to be able to do that with Trump being such an outlier.
So does it seem like the takeaway from this, or the goal for at least for the United States and for other countries, would be to walk away from the G7 with some trade deals?
I think so. That's to make substantial progress. The president said, you know, it was achievable that they could do a deal with Canada here. I mean, there's not a ton of time. President leaves tomorrow night, as do the other leaders. So we're looking at about a 48-hour window, but they are looking for an opportunity to get something done. I mean, you know, more broadly, I think what Mark Carney essentially would want is to get out of here without a major blow-up. The last time there was a G7 meeting in Canada when Trump, in his first term, it ended in disaster when the president was flying out and he basically ripped up the joint communique, and it was a bit of an imbroglio for Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister at the time. So they'd like to sort of use this as a chance to mollify the president, at least create some image of unity. So far, though, Trump not necessarily willing to play along.
All right, and we're going to bring in David Gura in just a moment, because I want to get both of your thoughts on that. And I want to kind of play off of that, Nick, in that, you know, Bloomberg News, on reporting on the event too, specifically talked about how all the global leaders are trying to avoid conflict with President Trump. Is this President Trump at the center? He's got the biggest dance card and everybody dancing around him?
Yeah, that's certainly true, though there are obviously a lot of other meetings and bilaterals. Every leader is coming here looking to essentially meet with every other leader. You are seeing a move to essentially establish a ceasefire for Gaza that's being orchestrated by the Italian delegation. So there's other stuff happening here, but you know, it's just such a fascinating dynamic when you essentially have 6 united versus 1, and the U.S. being the outlier, but also obviously having the world's largest economy and the world's biggest military. I mean, you can't really get this stuff done without participation from the U.S. So it's creating some awkwardness up here.
All right, I want to bring in David Gura into our conversation. We're going to keep Nick Wadhams still with us as well, but Bloomberg News correspondent, host of the Big Take podcast, David Gura, he's there in Banff, Canada. David, you two on the ground, like Nick, you guys pick up on kind of some of the nuances, but I want to ask you the same question about this idea of President Donald Trump kind of at the center of it all.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to sort of what we knew going into this, that we have a prime minister still fairly new to the job, and Mark Carney, who really wanted to avoid what happened back in 2018, wanted to kind of reform the agenda so that there'd be fewer landmines that he or other world leaders or Donald Trump could step into that could scuttle this whole thing. And I think what we saw this morning at that pool spray when Mark Carney was there with Donald Trump talking to reporters is, despite the prime minister's best laid efforts, all of that can kind of blow up in his face. So it was from that we got these remarks about Russia's previous involvement, and then what was the G8, now the G7, had him kind of musing about China playing a bigger role in this multilateral institution. Suffice to say, that's not something I think a lot of these other world leaders would be in favor of or even had considered going into this. So to Nick's good point, it's a very long and detailed agenda with a lot of meetings, both official and not. It's a long couple of days, and there are a lot of possibilities through which things can be changed radically by the comments of one world leader and by President Trump in particular.
What would a successful G7, David, look like to the United States and to President Trump as he leaves after a day?
I think before the crisis erupted in the Middle East, there was a lot of hope from this administration that some of these trade deals could be furthered. I'm sure they would say codified or signed, even though they don't seem to be in the position for that to happen. But I think they thought that the focus would be on what would come out of those bilateral meetings on the sidelines here vis-a-vis trade. And of course, what we've seen over the last few days has really cast a shadow over the proceedings in a way where that's unlikely to happen. And we saw both the president and other world leaders downplaying the likelihood of that happening over the course of this gathering. But I do look at President Trump in this forum in contrast with other G7s, including that one in 2018, and it's a president much more aware of the fact that he holds a lot of power here. There are a lot of eyes on him, and this notion of America first is now more firmly established. He feels more confident in that, and setting aside what's going on in the Middle East, recognizes the fact that he is the person with whom all these other world leaders want to meet and try to broker deals when it comes to trade policy. And there's a kind of confidence that comes from that I think is kind of eclipsing what we've seen in the past, which was his just kind of total disaffection with events like this one, finding them boring or not interesting or ponderous or unlikely to kind of yield the results that he would like to see.
Yeah, but there is something significant, right? That he is there and, a part of these meetings. Nick, come on back in on this conversation. Is there any feeling of global unity? And I say this with, Israel, Iran, that conflict. We still have Russia and Ukraine at war. There's a lot of stuff going on where not necessarily everybody agrees on how things should move forward from here. But I'm just curious, is there any signs of global unity? Again, and I do think it's significant that, President Trump ultimately is there.
Right, he is here. There was some speculation in the months before whether he would even attend. So his coming, I guess you could see that as a relatively good sign. But, even Mark Carney acknowledged in his opening remarks at this meeting, nostalgia is no longer going to suit us. We can't keep yearning for days gone by, which is essentially a recognition just how much things have changed. I mean, as David mentioned, you have this extraordinary moment. The first event of this whole conference was Trump meeting with Mark Carney for a bilateral, and Trump's first comment in that was what a huge mistake it had been to expel Russia from the G8 in 2014, and saying essentially that if they hadn't done that, the war in Ukraine never would have started. Of course, he got the facts wrong. He said Justin Trudeau had been the Canadian leader at the time. He wasn't. He also said that Russia was expelled. That was a mistake. Of course, Russia was expelled because it had invaded Crimea at the time, and when you invade a sovereign state like that, that's kind of incompatible with the principles of the G7. So it was a real signal at the time that Russia just could not be in this organization. So you see him immediately sort of coming in and almost asserting his dominance and separating himself from the other members. It's very hard to see how they can find common ground when the U.S. president is basically coming in, essentially spoiling for a fight.